All right, so welcome to this particular video. It will be with regards to an introduction just to break-even analysis, to give you some kind of an idea what break-even analysis is. And when you notice, okay, so what we'll talk about, we have this hot dog example. So I put this together, and through this hot dog example, I will try to illustrate to you the differences between fixed costs, variable costs, selling price, a time frame that you may want to use to find out your break even, what is capacity, and then we'll talk about the break even point. Okay, so I'll try to use all these visuals to show you how this actually works. All right, so when you're looking on the screen, it says, an introduction to break even analysis, and we have this cart, okay, that we have, and we want to be able to sell these hot dogs. Now, it can be anything that you want to sell. It can be an actual service, like for example, online services that they use, or you can be selling hot dogs, or you can be selling shoes or pants or anything like that. So it doesn't really matter what you're selling. Now, when you start selling anything, you always run into the concept of, you can't really sell much without actually trying to have some kind of costs associated with what you're selling. So I will concentrate on this hot dog example. So for instance, if you wanted to sell the hot dogs, you know that you're going to have several things that you're going to have to worry about. So one of those things is, this fancy cart, okay, so that you have right there. And that fancy cart, okay, so that we have, is basically going to cost you something, right? You might rent it or you might buy it out. So let's assume for the purpose of this video, okay, so that I'm going to take this cart, okay, and rent it out. And let's say that the cost is about $3,000, okay, per month. So that is the actual cost of the cart. And every month you're going to have to pay whoever you are renting this from. All right, so that's one of the costs that we have. Now, before you start even selling anything, you're going to have to pay, this particular $3,000 to whoever you rented it from or leased it from. And now, as you leased it from them, right, they will expect that you're going to pay them regardless of how many of these hot dogs you sell. So, for instance, this $3,000 is actually a cost which is associated on a time frame basis, right? So you are paying $3,000 every single month. All right, great. Now that $3,000, okay, so that you have, okay, this is considered to be a fixed cost. Now, why is it a fixed cost? So I'm going to abbreviate this fixed cost just with an FC. It is a fixed cost because it's independent of how many hot dogs you sell. So if you sell 1,000 hot dogs or 2,000 hot dogs, the $3,000 stays fixed. It doesn't change for you. And also the other part is that it is a cost which is on a monthly time frame basis, right? So that's what we have. Now, what other costs do we have? Well, we have some other costs. Okay, so for instance, we might be selling these hot dog wieners here. So whatever that they are made out of. Okay, so we're going to be selling these hot dog wieners. Now, this particular cost, you can buy them in bulk, which probably most of them do. And in bulk, you can kind of figure out what is the cost per one of these wieners. Okay, so let's assume that the cost of one of these wieners, all right, is, let's keep it simple, okay, let's say 30 cents. All right, so now we're paying 30 cents for these wieners for every time, okay, that somebody is buying one of our hot dogs. Now, another component that we will need, of course, to make the hot dog is we're going to need the buns. And now the buns, we can also assume, okay, so let's say for simplicity's sake, we'll assume they're about 15 cents, okay, per one bun, okay? So this is each. All right, so this is each. Okay, so every time, we want to sell an actual hot dog, well, we're going to have costs associated with these. And now we have these kind of fancy mustard and ketchup. Now you might have all kinds of other toppings there, but I'll assume that we'll have these two just for simplicity. And what I will assume is, okay, so that the cost per one, maybe not everybody uses ketchup or mustard, but let's assume, okay, that if they do, it's going to cost us about, let's say, 5 cents, all right, every single time that they use it. Of course, people use different amounts, but we can kind of approximate these. So now what we have is we have all of these different costs. All right. Now, how do the costs that I wrote out, so for the wieners, for the buns, and for the ketchup and mustard, how do they differ from the actual rental? Notice that the rental of $3,000 will not change on a monthly basis. But our costs for the wieners, buns, okay, and the mustard ketchup, every time that somebody buys one of our hot dogs, we have to make it. So it will continuously cost us a certain amount. So now I can add these up. Okay, so per one of these hot dogs, so if I'm going to add these up, what I have is, I have the cost, so 30 cents plus my 15 cents plus, okay, the 5 cents. So if you're adding it up, okay, so it's about 15 cents. All right, so sorry, 50 cents, okay, that would be our cost per one. It is not per month, right? It's not a per time frame. It is actually per one. So what we refer this, okay, in terms of our costs, is that this is known as a variable cost per one unit. So this is a variable cost, and typically you'll see this as VC. That's the variable cost per one unit. So if somebody wants to, sell 10 of these hot dogs, okay, it's going to cost them $5 because it would be 10 times 50 cents for each of them. And that varies. That's why it is called variable. So it varies depending on how many actual hot dogs you make or sell. So that's a variable cost. While a fixed cost, okay, as we had here, that does not vary depending on how many units you actually sell. So that's the difference. So we have two different costs. Now there may be all of these other wonderful things that are happening, and typically there are, but because we're just introducing break-even, those are the ones that we will worry about. So what we will have is, we're going to say that our total cost that we have is basically equal to our fixed cost that we have. Okay, so in this case, it was our $3,000 plus everything, okay, that we make in terms of our hot dogs. So all the variable costs. So I can't say variable costs VC because that's just per one. So what instead I'm going to say is, okay, if you want to know, okay, all of your costs, so we refer this to the total variable cost. So when you throw in the word total, it means all the different hot dogs you sold, right? Or maybe services or shoes or whatever it is. So this will be total variable cost. Okay, so there's a difference between the two. Variable cost is just per one unit, and total variable cost is for all the units. So that would be my total cost. Now, of course, okay, so if I take my hot dog example, so I have $3,000 is my fixed cost. That doesn't change. And remember that the time frame is just 1 month. At least this is what we have for this example. Plus my total variable cost. Now, that varies depending on how many units you sell. Okay, so I know how much one unit costs, this VC. So my VC that I have right here, okay, I know that that is 50 cents, but I don't know how many I will be selling. So typically what we will do is, okay, so we're going to put X, and X just simply means how many did you sell, okay? So how many units did you sell? And if I sold 10 units or 20 units or 30 units, okay, that will obviously change. That's why it's called a variable cost. Okay, so now these are all my different costs. So so I'm gonna draw this out for us. Okay, so let's imagine, so we have something like this. All right, and what I'm gonna do here is, okay, so I have all my total costs. So total costs, and let's say that our time frame is 1 month. So that's a time frame of 1 month, and we can change it to 2 months, 3 months, whatever it may be. Okay, our costs will adjust. And now, okay, so what we had is we had our fixed costs. So I'm going to just draw this out here. So here's my fixed cost. Okay, and now for my fixed cost, I'm going to change this up a little bit. Okay, so what we have, so let me do the fill. Okay, so that was my fixed cost. And fixed cost was $3,000. So notice, if you don't sell anything, you're gonna have to pay that fixed cost of $3,000 from somewhere. You're probably gonna have to borrow it, or maybe you had money coming into the business. Now, your variable costs, every time that you sell a hot dog, you have to pay, for the hot dog wiener, for the bun, for the ketchup and mustard, and so on. So our variable costs that we have, okay, are going to change on a consistent basis. And that cost is added up, okay, on top of, so this also continuously keeps growing here. Okay, so that's what we have there. And so that is my total variable costs. Okay, and it keeps going. The fixed cost doesn't change. So the fixed cost just stays the same. That's why it's called fixed. The variable cost, unfortunately, will keep going up as long as we sell more and more hot dogs. Right? So this will keep going and going and going. Now, obviously, if we're selling these hot dogs, we're also receiving the sales or the revenue that's coming in. So if we have all of these hot dogs, well, we can pick a price, okay, in terms of trying to sell the hot dogs. So let's imagine that we would pick, okay, so for simplicity's sake, let's say that our selling price, for one of these hot dogs, okay, let's say is $2.50. So every time we sell a hot dog, we're going to make $2.50. And for that, what this means is that from this selling price, we can find out what is the total sales that we've made, or very often, okay, so this is called total revenue or just revenue. Okay, so all the money coming into the business. Now, that total revenue, so we'll designate it as TR, and it is equal to always your selling price, so whatever your selling price is, multiplied by how many units that you sold. Right? So notice, we've seen this X before. Okay, so we've seen the X right here, because that was how many units you sold, right? Okay, except it was associated with your variable cost. So every time you sell an actual hot dog, okay, 50 cents of that selling price is actually a cost, okay? But you are going to be selling these at $2.50. So visually, again, so what we have is, we have our total variable costs, okay, are going up. Our fixed costs stays the same. And now what we start seeing, so what I'm going to put here on the left-hand side, okay, so here I'm going to put my total revenue. Total revenue. Now, my total revenue, okay, so as I keep going here. So my total revenue is, okay, going to start to increase, okay, going up. Now, if you compare the two, so at the moment, so if I compare right here, however many units I've sold, well, you notice that my costs are actually outdoing my total revenue. So what I want to do is I want to be able to sell more and more and more so that, okay, so what I will have is I will, okay, make this thing grow further and further and further. So more actual total revenue is going to bring in more money for me. Now, of course, it will also bring in more total variable costs, but the fixed costs will stay the same. And now the ultimate goal is that what you want is you want to have, okay, eventually, okay, as you keep going right here, okay, so as you keep going, you eventually want to be able to come to a point where these two are actually meeting, right? Where your total revenue is equal to your total costs. Now, if they are equal, this is exactly what you call break even. Why? Because you've covered all your costs. Okay, so that's the ultimate goal. We want to be able to break even, and we want to be able to find out, when does this happen? Meaning, how many hot dogs do you have to sell in order to cover all your costs? And now, after that point, you basically start making a profit. So that's what happens. Okay, so visually, so this is what we had. Now, okay, so let's do a little bit of a recap for our example, okay, in terms of our hot dogs. So what we had is we had a total cost of $3,000 to rent our hot dog cart. We had a payment of 50 cents for every single hot dog that we sell, that we make. And we have our total revenue. Okay, so our total revenue is very simple. It is just the price of the hot dog multiplied by how many that we sell. So these two, okay, are basically your equations that you need in order to find out when is the break-even point going to happen. Okay? So now that's what I have. Now, another item that I wanted to point out is, because I've mentioned, okay, this in the agenda that you see there, and that is the time frame. So in terms of a time frame, okay, so what a time frame means, it is a period. So in our case, we said 1 month, but it doesn't have to be a month. It can be 1 quarter, when 1 quarter means 3 months, okay? Or it can be 1 year, okay? Or any other time frame. So when you are working in these questions, you always have to know, okay, so what is my time frame, okay, that I'm going to have to be selling these hot dogs or making these shoes or selling my services or something like that. Okay, so that's the time frame. And within each time frame, what happens is you cannot infinitely make as many hot dogs as you like, or you cannot, create even phones, okay, as many as you like. There's a capacity, there's a maximum amount that you can actually have, okay, and you won't typically be able to go further than that because you won't have the resources, okay? If there's only one person selling these hot dogs, they can only work so fast, right? So when that happens, is we call that a capacity. That's the maximum for your time frame that you can actually sell. So let's say for this particular example, let's say we can, let's say maybe we're in New York or in Toronto or somewhere in a big place, okay? We can sell 3,000 hot dogs every single month. That's our capacity, okay? So capacity is always the maximum amount. So now we know capacity. We should understand a time frame, which is a period in time. We know the selling price, okay, so that's how much you're selling your hot dogs for example. We know the variable cost for each of those hot dogs, and we should understand a fixed cost. Okay, again, the fixed cost is something that is not changing for you, irrelevant of how many hot dogs you sell, and that would be our rental, for example, for our cart. All right, so let's calculate this break-even point. I wish that I can find, for example, this break-even point when these two things balance. All right, now when do they balance? They balance when your total revenue that you have, so total revenue is going to equal to your total costs. But we have this wonderful equation here, total costs and total revenue. So if you want to find your actual break-even point, so break-even point, okay, so that point is how many units will you be selling in order to have those two equal. So total revenue equals to total cost. And now I know my total revenue equation. So there we go. I know my total cost equation. So that's what it is right here. Now notice what I have is I have an X. Okay, and if I take that X right here, I should be able to solve this equation to find out that X, once I solve it, because I made them equal, will tell me how many units I will have to sell in order to make a profit of 0, to finally cover all my costs. Okay, so let's do that. So I'm going to shift this over to the left-hand side. So I'm going to have $2.50x minus 0.50x equals to 3,000. So this is just $2. Notice 250 minus that. And now I can divide both sides by 2. You don't have to keep the decimals in there if you don't want to. And that's going to give me x, okay, and that is equal to 1,500 units. What does that mean? It means you actually have to sell 1,500 units of hot dogs in a month, okay, because that was our time frame, in 1 month, in order to break even. Once you start selling more than that, then you start making money. If you start selling less than that, you're actually going to be owing more than you actually made. All right, so this is the introduction, okay, to our break-even analysis, hopefully through a simple enough example that you can kind of gauge on what was talked about. All right, thank you for watching, okay? Peace. See you later.